Our scripture reading this morning comes from Mark's Gospel, the 16th chapter, verses 1 to 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices, so they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
Well, thanks for the excuse to get out of the house and for saving me a parking place. One of the good things, maybe the only good thing about you not being here this morning is that I can pretend you're laughing at my jokes. Don't unmute them. I don't want to know the truth. All right. Well, what a fine mess we've made for ourselves. I don't mean us. I don't even mean the Chinese. I mean all of us, plundering forests we should have left alone, eating wild animals better left wild with their viruses intact. You know, I thought this morning about preaching from Leviticus, where there's all those weird rules about not eating weird things. They might have been onto something back there. Or we could have hit Genesis, the one fruit of the one tree we weren't supposed to eat, or we would die. And what do? We're not that good at respecting limits. And it's not just the people at the wet market in Wuhan. Every day around the world, we lose 30,000 acres of forest, and not for bushmeat, but for palm oil and petroleum and other products that line the larders of the industrialized economy and our own cupboards. We're on our way to emptying the seas. For instance, like sushi, 97% of the bluefin tuna are gone from the oceans. We tend to love stuff to death, if you know what I'm saying. Our biosphere and our backyards are being emptied of birds and bugs, and we need both on this planet, even as we fill our life-giving atmosphere with life-threatening greenhouse gases. Oh, this is an affront to the Creator that we've been talking about in this morning's service. How dare we disdain what God has ordained? And an affront to future generations. What will they say of us if they are there? But it will also inevitably come back on us as well. Witness the current moment. But even here, in these dank and dark times, there is resurrection. Zookeepers in the Hong Kong Zoo had been waiting a decade for their two pandas to get together. As soon as the tourists disappeared, they found each other. Every day in the USA, 1 million creatures are killed by our vehicles on our highways, and about 500,000 birds. However, now we're driving 70 to 80% less, saving hundreds of thousands of critters an untimely death. And this holds true for humans as well. Did you hear the report that the car insurance companies are doing very well these days, thank you, as claims have gone way down? So too we, along with God's creation, are finding life amidst the current troubles. They say that in China, 70,000 people will not die who would have otherwise, as air pollution has dropped so dramatically this year. And just for comparison, even if we double the number of reported COVID-19 deaths in China, it's still under 10,000. And all of us, and especially our progeny, will benefit as global CO2 emissions will likely drop by half this year, a brief respite for the global climate, and actually putting us right about where we need to be to avoid climate chaos an ongoing 50% reduction. Keep that in mind. And we are having a resurrection of imagination. People in cities in northern India are catching a glimpse of the Himalaya for the first time in 30 years, as the pollution finally clears. They can see what they've been missing. Some of you have been to Nepal with us. You know the grandeur, the splendor, the inspiration of those tall mountains. And we ourselves, we've had a resurrection of our imagination, needing to be creative beyond what we thought possible in cooking for and entertaining ourselves, in coming up with new cures for the virus. And what an opportunity to think about coming out of this with some of these things still intact. Clearer skies, safer highways, finding satisfaction less in trips to the mall than in walks in the woods, a recognition that some things are better locally sourced than globally. I mean, think food, think surgical masks, think toilet tissue. Yes, about 10% is imported. And there's one other opportunity this virus presents for us, and that is for us to experience for once what is often a regular feature of the lives of people around the world, our global neighbors. They are regularly subject to and victimized by forces far beyond their control, as we are feeling put upon in this time. I mean, pick your pandemic. Climate change. It laid waste to the farm economy in Malawi when we were visiting there last May. The families were down to one meal a day because of food they could not grow. I guess, the monsoon seasons, which are life-giving to people around the tropical areas of the world, have gone haywire, sometimes coming late or not at all, other times coming as a deluge. And by the way, there were flooded out areas on I-81 coming up this morning when I drove here. And I understand you've had some flooding lately in this region. We are messing with the climate. It comes back on us. And for us, it's kind of our just desserts. If I've got to get my way through a pool of water on I-81, for them, it's injustice. They do nothing to create climate change. Their carbon footprint is minuscule compared to ours. So that makes climate change in the poor world a matter of human justice. Militarism, whether by Boko Haram in Nigeria or coalition forces in Afghanistan, local people caught in this or that conflict, this or that crossfire. We met with refugee women in South Sudan just last May. And God's creation, set upon from every direction, as are those who defend it. Every week, 3 environmental activists and 2 park rangers are killed around the world, trying to keep powerful interests away from protected areas or rhinos. And this actually is where our scripture comes in, lest you thought we would never get there. As we think about where we are just now, and matters of life and death in general for our planet and its people, there are others who think they have the upper hand, who think they hold all the cards, who think they call all the shots, and they have powerful tools at their disposal. Just think about it, whether religious dogma or political, economic, media. Just like on that first Easter weekend, they fancy themselves in charge of things. Who speaks and who listens, who is accused and who's the accuser, who makes the rules and who abides by them, who sets the course of history and who falls in step or underfoot, who lives and who dies. And then, in the blink of God's eye, the powerful are put in their place. Final authority, not theirs. Control the agenda, not today. The last word, I guess not. They couldn't even keep a dead man dead. And the last word, it would come from these women, representatives in the divine calculus of all those pushed down by forces beyond their control. Underrepresented, their labors undervalued, speaking when spoken to. Even in the other gospel accounts of the resurrection, Jesus' own did not want to believe these women. And yet this glorious message is entrusted to them. They carry it with them as they flee that empty tomb. Yes, fleeing in fear and amazement, the Bible says. And we can actually appreciate both the fear and the amazement. Fearful? Who wouldn't be? For 2 reasons, at least, that I can think of. 1, strange things have happened here today. Things that defy the limits of the world we know, even the pre-Newtonian world, where such things might have been more tolerated. And secondly, because of what this implied for them, they may have been fearful. Jesus, as they had known him, was a great human being with near miraculous insight and abilities, and had to have been in his inner circle must have been simply exhilarating. I mean, the feeling of being part of something bigger than yourself, which was making the world a better place. But that was one thing. This was of another order altogether, and if they let it, would make them different altogether. We witness these great things at our peril because they have the power to change us. But the amazing part was that they were now in a different place in the scheme of things, no longer subject to the higher powers of one kind or another. No, now theirs was the higher power, the power of life, the power of hope, the power of creative energy to fashion a world of God's liking, reflecting God's values and God's priorities, rather than being beholden to theirs, the pretenders to the throne. And it is clear that the early church got the message by the way they began to live. So we can be assured that the women must have gotten over their initial reticence to tell anyone as the Gospel of Mark came to its abrupt end. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today, so to speak. And in one way, Mark did us a favor in stopping his story here at verse 8. This is the traditional ending of the Gospel, right where you heard it read by Pastor Greg. He was showing us that the story can't be stopped even if we ourselves had not had an encounter with the risen Lord, even if we have not seen the Lord walking and talking and eating among us, as we have not. We, like the women, only know what we've been told. He is not here, He is risen, He has gone before you to Galilee. Now, not Jerusalem, not Rome, but to the hinterlands, the Elizabeth towns of this world, the Malawis of this world, because that's where the revolution sparked by the resurrection would be fomented. And was it ever? Rather than stratified, egalitarian. Rather than militarized, pacifist. Rather than ossified, spirit-led. Rather than stigmatized, welcoming all. Rather than petrified, they were fearless in the face of the opposition from both the religious and the political powers that do not take kindly to such movements. They didn't let that stop them. Because the religious authority knew that what these people were proposing and beginning to live undermines the status quo and gives hope to the masses who long once again to get to glimpse the mountains in the distance, till now obscured by all kinds of systems that we can each name. That's what the fledgling church did with its newfound power. What will we do with this newfound power? This news that we have on our lips in this Easter season? Well, what is needed? that often determines our response. What are the barriers to the full life for God's creation and God's children? Well, when has there been a time in our national and international life when a simple word of welcome was more needed? And thank you in this congregation for speaking that word of welcome. In spite of opposition from many quarters, did you expect less? When has there been a time when it has been more imperative to bridge the ideological divide? Divides fostered, by the way, by the powerful to serve their own interests. Up in Vermont, last fall, my partner Pete up there joined in with the library and the local Baptist congregation to begin to put on community suppers once a month on a Sunday night. There wasn't any agenda there. You were just supposed to come and eat and sit by people that you didn't really usually associate with and who might have been on the other side of some aisle in our society from you, just to restore the civility. We have to get a grip on the environmental ship, or else the earth may prove flat, as someone said, because we are headed for a precipice. Gernot Wagner, in the New York Times a few months ago, wrote an article titled Climate Change, The Long Slide. His thesis, climate change is gradual enough that it's not getting our attention until it's too late and there's no turning back. This reminded me of when I was a kid, when we used to have snow in Virginia. There was a long hill near my aunt and uncle's house, kind of a back country road, but a long straight hill down to a bridge. And when we had snow, it would sometimes ice over that hill. So we'd go over there and we would get our lightning gliders out and go down that hill, sometimes at rocket speed, because it would be ice on top. Now, the problem was, at the bottom of the hill, there was a narrow bridge that you had to hit, if you know my meaning. Well, one of those times when I was about 10, surface was perfect, ice covered, we had our lightning gliders, down the hill we went. I was going so fast that I was dragging the toes of my boots as my brakes. By the time I got to the bottom, I'd worn holes in the toes of my boots, trying to slow myself down before I got close to that narrow bridge. Why are we, individually and collectively, not wearing holes in the toes of our boots as we head down this long climate change slide, where not a narrow bridge awaits, but a lake of fire? Who's going to awaken us? Who's going to take us on another path? If not now, when? If not us, who? As these sayings go. And finally, in our devil take the hindmost national and international economic system, which the current crisis is laying bare, as we all know, how do we reconnect with those on the outside looking in? The half of the world that's living on less than $5 a day, and those in our own society with no margin for error, as Pastor Jason was mentioning just a few moments ago. And now both groups have less to live on. And the world knows the world is like this. You know, the leaders of this world knows that it's like this, and yet they tolerate it and perhaps even welcome it because it helps those with privilege maintain their status and keeps the others in their place. The change must come from here, from those of us on this side of the empty tomb who know down deep that God has bigger plans for this world. How do we connect with those plans? We can only hope that, like the women that morning, we will experience things that shift our thinking. Help us see something, the old thing, in a new way, with new possibilities. 2 Palm Sundays ago, I was preaching at Lynchburg, congregation down in Lynchburg, Virginia, which is about 40 miles from my home, beyond biking range. So on occasions like that, as this weekend coming here, I go to the airport and get a rental car. So I bike to the airport about 15 miles away, get my rental car, put my bike in the back, go home, do the thing, go back, reverse the process at the end of the weekend. Well, this time, as I'm heading up on my bike to Roanoke to the airport, it's pretty cold. In fact, it's even beginning to spit snow a little bit, but it holds off until I get there. Coming back out of town, as I get to the city limits, it started snowing harder. And I come to a stretch of the road on Route 460, kind of a busy 4-lane highway, and I see a person walking along the road. Snowing. I also know that's a rough part of the road. I never bike over there. It's just too rough for my bike with the little tires. So I have to even go on the other side of the road at that stretch and then come back over when it clears up. Well, I'm thinking, there's a person walking, it's snowing, that's a rough side of the road, and I've got a car. Wow. So I pull in ahead of them about 100 yards. I pop out the driver's side, I look back, say, need a ride? They start jogging. I think that's yes. So finally, the person comes up to the driver's side, the passenger side. I open the door for them. They get in. I see it's a woman. I don't think I'd recognize this. And I've got my biking gear on. I'm looking a little strange. But her name is Joyce. She's African American. I said, where are you going? She said, the Kroger store. It's just right down the road, about a half a mile. I said, you working or you're shopping? She said, I'm working. I said, couldn't take the bus? She said, no. And then I remembered the bus stop's about a half mile back. She has to end her bus ride and walk about a mile to her job every day and then get back, no matter the weather, no matter the road condition. Pull up to the front door a few minutes later. She starts to get out. I say, have a nice day. She just says, pray for me. I don't know what she meant. I don't walk in her shoes. An African American woman with a low-wage job in our society having to walk the last mile every day. Well, up until then, I had seen mass transit as an environmental issue, that we need to find alternatives to driving our cars 3.3 trillion miles, which we did last year. It's part of the problem facing our planet. Hopefully our work-at-home thing we got going on now will carry on over. But that day I realized that transit is a justice issue, needed to help the people who have no other means get to where they need to go in life, not just to the job, but how to improve themselves and provide for their families and do what they need to do to survive and thrive. All these things, whether they're changing the way we relate to our neighbors or our neighborhood, God's creation, will take uncommon faith, hope, and love to address, much less address successfully. But it will also take a measure of the fear and amazement that come when we, like the women, realize things are at play here and available to us that defy reason and confound the carefully ordered systems that even we are tempted to believe cannot be changed. The empty tomb suggests otherwise. Last summer, my 94-year-old Aunt Mary passed away, she of the steep sledding hill. My dad had died 4 years earlier. Aunt Mary was the last of that generation on my side of the family, my immediate family. So I perhaps treasured her even more and made it a point to get by to see her occasionally on Sunday afternoons. She was in decline and couldn't get out. She lived with her daughter and her daughter's husband, but Aunt Mary's mind was still sharp, and we enjoyed our 20, 30-minute visits. Well, while I was away on a trip last summer somewhere, she started going downhill fast, and they had to take her to a care facility. Soon after I got back home, I planned to go visit her there, to see her there. Then, the night before I had planned to go, as I was lying asleep in my bedroom, I was suddenly awakened by a commotion outside my ground floor window. It was almost like a preternatural chant in some unknown tongue. The dog up the hill heard it. It started howling. It went on for a couple of minutes, seemingly right on the other side of the window, then was gone. Well, I certainly wasn't going to get up and open the curtain. But I did finally go to the other room of the house to survey the yard. Nothing. The next morning, I got a call from my cousin that Aunt Mary had died that night. I don't think I'd have the nerve to tell you this story, except that my pastor also had an encounter with her presence that night in his house before he knew that she had passed away. What did it mean? Maybe only that things are not as they seem. We had better hope things are not as they seem, because if this real world continues its course, we have big problems. However, if there are other things at play, fearful and amazing things, things that may yet snatch life from the clasp of death, then we may have a chance, and our world along with us. He is risen. He is risen indeed.